Hello, and welcome to our first podcast, Plan Life Right. And I'm your host, Kevin Ross, and today we're diving into a topic that's been making the headlines for years, but really in the last week, we've been hearing a lot about these thing called tariffs. So, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about what are they exactly, and how do they work? Why do they seem to be such a big deal in global trade and now in politics? Um, how long have they been around? And the pros and cons of tariffs. So just kind of bring it around, whether you're a business owner, a curious consumer, or just someone trying to make sense of the economy. This episode is going to be for you. We're going to break it all down. We're going to do some simple illustrations, some relatable stories, hopefully, and even explore whether tariffs can really lower income taxes. So grab your favorite drink, sit back, and let's get this baby going. So let's just start with the basics. What exactly is a tariff? Imagine that you're at a farmer's market and you see two stands selling apples. We've all done that before. And one stand selling locally grown apples, and the other is selling imported apples from another company. Now, let's say that the government decides to charge a fee um, on those foreign apples. We'll call that a tax, right? And what that does is it actually makes the guy that's selling imported apples more expensive than they would be had there not been a tariff, a tax on those apples. So that fee is what a tariff is. And so to bring it into this past week, and everybody was flipping out, or the media was anyway, was flipping out about, oh my gosh, coffee's going to quadruple in prices when Trump came out and said we're going to put a tariff on Colombia coffee and all their exports. So immediately the media was saying it's going to raise prices. It's going to raise prices. Um, Nobody's going to be able to afford a cup of coffee. Um, but shortly thereafter, maybe 90, I don't even think it was 24 hours, Colombia said, hey, you know what? We'll take back those prisoners. And as a matter of fact, we'll fly our own plane to go pick up those prisoners as opposed to you guys, the US, flying and spending your taxpayers' money to fly these. They didn't say criminals, but that's, I think, well, they're illegal. So technically they're criminals because they're illegal. But let's not get into that. These people that in some cases were in Colombia prisons, we're sending them back. So not only did the tariff negotiation work as a negotiating chip, we saw Colombia go above and beyond here. So why did that happen? Well, so when you tax a country um, and, and put a tariff on that country's uh, exports that we're importing, theoretically, we are going to have to pay more. The problem in this situation is the U.S. is Colombia's number one um, importer of Colombia coffee. So we're their best customer, right? And number two, we buy oil from them too, but we get oil from other countries as well. And now, as Trump said, drill, baby, drill. So we're going to be producing our own again, which will drive down prices, right? Too much supply drives down um, prices because we got more supply than the demand. So that's more economics than I think anybody wants to get into. And I'll try to stay out of my economic professor role that I once had. So let's talk about this. So here's what happened. Colombia realized wait a second, if we just go pick these guys up or accept them in, then we don't lose our number one customer. And for all you guys that um, are in sales or own businesses, and you got this number one customer, by God, you go above and beyond for your number one customer. Because if you lose that number one customer, what happens? Now you've got to replace it. And typically, a number one customer in most industries is 30, 40, 50% of somebody's book, a salesman's book of business or company's book. Because what do? We don't keep on growing our business. And so we're beholden to this one that's got a large share of our overall business. And to lose it, that's pretty significant. And so that's what happened here in Colombia. Colombia said, wait a minute, if we uh, don't accept our Colombian people back, then we're going to lose our number one customer, and then um, we've got to replace our number one customer. Well, how are they going to create demand for Colombian coffee throughout the world? I mean, because the world's buying them from other places as well. So um, pretty quickly that got resolved. That's not always going to be the case, but in this case, you know, let's not listen to the hype on the media and you know when they're promoting their agenda. This is another example of um, people going off on the wild side and not seeing the whole story for what it was. Now, what happens if they said no? Well, if they said no, then what America would have done is we would have bought coffee from other uh, producers that produce coffee, other countries that farm out coffee. So not that big a deal because there's not just one source. There was one source that would be an issue, but there's not one source. So when tariffs are done right and they're used as a negotiating chip, uh, those can be good things for uh, consumers, and in this case for America because we're sending back unwanted illegals um, that are here in our country. So that's kind of a little, you know, most current um, uh, analogy or example of what's going on here with the tariffs. So in this case, Trump uses it as a bargaining chip, um, and and so that put pressure on potentially could put pressure on other countries to make deals or change their policies. And in this case, the policy was pretty quick, where uh, Colombia said, "Well, we're not going to go try to replace our number one client. Um, we're going to make a deal with the U.S." and then they just one-upped it by now saving us taxpayer money. I think that's brilliant in this particular situation. Um, another one that we experienced that maybe we don't that everybody's not aware, and it's gone back and forth over the years. And in this one, I'm going to talk about cars. So here's an example of car buying. So let's just say that Germany's selling a lot of cars to the U.S., but the U.S. feels like Germany's not playing fair. So maybe they're subsidizing their car industry, meaning that the government's paying for part of um, the salaries of those German auto manufacturers, so that the cars are made a little cheaper or doesn't cost as much, and then those German cars would be cheaper than the U.S. cars. Now that's the opposite of what really happens. Everybody knows if you're buying a German car, you're paying more than an American made car. But in this example, we'll just say that Germany's needs to sell because their cars got too expensive and they're now sitting on the lots. They're not able to move them. Other countries, for example, aren't able to import those German cars because their economies are bad. And so therefore there's not that much demand because inflation is going up and cars have gotten too expensive. These German cars have got too expensive. So what can happen here is the U.S. here could impose a tariff on those now cheaper German cars to make them more expensive and less attractive. And now we're selling um, or buying more cars, more U.S. cars that are manufactured in the U.S. because they're cheaper. And so there's some method to the madness on, well, if we tariffed all the countries, and I think Trump came out and said this, so we're going to put tariffs on some of these countries. Well, it can drive production and manufacturing back to the US. But the problem is, especially with the last few years of hyperinflation, that it just made the stuff manufactured in the US even that much more expensive. So it could backfire if we get too headstrong in here and we go off to you know go after countries and start putting tariffs on all these different imported goods, especially if we can't manufacture those internally or have other sources to purchase, other countries in this case, that we could purchase similar products. Okay, so the pros and cons of tariffs. On the positive side, tariffs can protect local industries. That can protect jobs, especially if the country's struggling to compete with cheaper imports. Tariffs can level that playing field. So, for example, if a U.S. steel mill is at risk of shutting down because of cheap steel from abroad, tariffs can be kept that actually raise the cost of foreign steel, therefore making the U.S. steel more affordable and in demand. So they'll use U.S. steel instead of buying the imported steel. So now we've saved jobs in America and we're able to manufacture steel. Now, reality, what happened? We just outsourced it. We shut down a large majority of our steel manufacturing companies, which really, back when that happened, had a negative impact on the economy because we didn't have a tariff on the foreign steel, and then we had a lot of Americans that lost jobs that were in the steel making business. So tariffs can be good, could protect jobs, in this case, the U.S. Steel. They also could generate revenue for the government. So when imported goods are taxed, that money goes into the government coffers, which then can be used for public services and infrastructure. So I think might have come out in this past 10 days that, back in the 1800s, I think it was in the early 1900s, we didn't have federal income tax. We had tariffs. And what the tariffs did was it made the imported goods more expensive, and it encouraged um, Americans to manufacture their own products. So instead of relying from stuff coming from England and Europe and Asia, uh, it encouraged us to start manufacturing. That's why we had so many manufacturing companies from the early 1900s and so forth, because it was cheaper for us to manufacture here in the United States than import it. Now, recently that's flipped. We've become more of a service economy than a manufacturing economy. Same goes with farming. And we used to farm a lot. and now we probably import a lot more. Not probably, we do. We import a lot more than we can. We've got all this land that we could use it. That's a whole nother story. We're not going to get into it today. Today, it's all about tariffs. So, so what are some of the downsides? As I mentioned earlier, they could often lead to higher prices for consumers. And if tariffs are placed on electronics or clothing or even food, that cost gets passed on to us, the consumer, at the checkout counter. Um, so that's a, a real live situation, and we've seen that here in the past couple of years, and then also tariffs can strain international relationships. So when we're beholden to a country and we're throwing tariffs on, that can now get us into a trade war. So what I'm talking about is, so when one country imposes tariffs, it can lead to a retaliation, and then it starts creating this cycle of economic tension. And so for businesses that rely on imported material, tariffs can increase production costs, so it makes it harder for them to compete globally. So if we're importing steel from China, for example, because we've gotten rid of so much of our steel manufacturing that it's still cheaper for us to import steel from China, for example, but we put a tariff on that. Well, the things that we use that we manufacture here in the U.S. that we use steel for, that's just increased the price of the product that we're manufacturing. So there's all these other things that can happen with tariffs. So you got to be very strategic um, in doing it. But if we jumped over and we took the side of, well, if we put enough tariffs on imported goods, we could, I think I heard this, we could not only lower federal income taxes, we could do away with federal income taxes. So, that's great if the government can generate enough revenue from tariffs, and it could reduce our reliance or their reliance on our income taxes. Um, and, maybe they're more diligent in what we're spending taxpayer money on. I mean, what came out here past few days of money that was supposed to go to Afghanistan to Gaza is just it's just a total misuse of government power and their inability to be stewards with the money that they're requiring us to pay our hard-earned money. They want to tax, and then they are not good stewards at all. So hopefully we start zeroing down. We start making some more frugal and better use of the money that's coming in, whether they're tariff dollars or whether they're our income dollars that we're giving the government here. So, so again, tariffs could lower income taxes, which if that happened, let's just go through this scenario. We put tariffs on 80-90% of the goods coming in, and it lowers our taxes. So if you are in a 25% tax bracket or even a 30% tax bracket, you're a good wage earner, they do away with it. And you're in the 30% tax bracket. So you're making $300,000. So $300,000 at 30, that's $90,000 of tax dollars. If you had that extra $90,000, I mean, what's that mean? That means you got $90,000 to go spend in the economy. So that creates growth in the economy. So it could work. The problem with it is if they got rid of income tax and then the new administration comes in 4 years and they are, let's spend, the let's spend these taxpayer money. Well, there's no tax. we're going to lower tariffs. We're going to bring back state income tax. They could bring it back in a fever. And so it's always be a little suspect when you hear, hey, we're going to make taxes simpler. We're going to take these deductions away. When they take the deductions away, the next group can come in and they just pile on, and we don't have that deduction. They don't ever give us the deduction back. They take a deduction, you never see that deduction again. The new group comes in, they don't give that back. They just tax you more, and you've got less places to move your money around. So it's a catch 22, and unfortunately, we the taxpayers are paying a big price on that, or can pay a big price on it. Just one more example. Um, if if you get into a tariff, you get into a trade war. I want to hit on that a little bit. Um, it's I want to use this analogy to kind of maybe this makes a little bit more sense. But imagine you got a friend and you got two friends. They keep one upping each other, right? I got a BMW 5 Series, and the other guy comes in and goes, I bought the BMW M Series. So they're just constantly, it doesn't matter what they're doing. I got the um, hoodie from XYZ company, and the other guy, I got the hoodie from Lululemon. So I spent three times as much as you spent, but I got a Lululemon one. So it's just the back and forth, doing it on every consumer item they can think of. Um, so soon they're going back and forth, and then you say, I'm going to take your shoes because this is a tax on you paying too much or buying too much. And so now they're like, well, wait a minute. If I don't go buy the Lululemon hoodie, I get to keep my shoes. Yeah. So all of a sudden they don't buy that Lululemon because the tax was too high, right? It could have cost me a pair of sneakers, a pair of tennis shoes. So there's things out there, that you got to kind of look at the big picture and say, okay, what does it mean? Tariff sounds like a big word. Bottom line is simply a a tax. It's can contribute to government revenue, but it's unlikely to be the magic solution for lowering income taxes all by itself. Maybe if they got diligent in saving money and finding out where these boondoggles are being used and the overprice that they're paying as a government entity, and they lower that. Now they've lowered down what they're gonna spend. That's going to help. And then if they put some tariffs in, then maybe that will enable them to lower our taxes. Could happen. Um, so to close up, to wrap up this episode on Plan Life Right, I want to say, what we've done today. We covered what tariffs are, how they work, some pros and cons. Will they really lower income taxes? They may, um, and 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 hopefully give you kind of a perspective that's not just the media coming out and saying tariffs are bad, tariffs are bad. They can work. They can be used as a negotiating chip. They can be bad, but let's reserve and think about what they're talking about the tariffs being on, and maybe it's a good thing because we've got other sources and there are other places where we can get it. In this case, in the Columbia, we saw that flip. That's not always going to be the case. So pay attention, think about it, and I want you guys to listen to our next podcast on Plan Life Right, and it's going to be on 2 cups of Frappuccino and becoming a millionaire when you retire. Hope everyone has a great day. Thanks for tuning in, and thanks for listening to Plan Life Right.